I recently moved into a new house in a quiet suburban area. I'm not going to say where it is because it's had its fair share of media coverage and teens showing up at night to try to get a glimpse inside the infamous house. It's been on the market for 3 years and secured the house at a much cheaper price due to the fact that 2 people had been murdered there. The mystery and the brutality of the murders catapulted the story into the local news. No specific details were released to the public, and I only found out about it because a friend of mine is a local realtor with connections. Nobody was ever arrested for the murders. A male in his 30s was found in the living room, and a female in her 30s was found barricaded in the basement. Another mysterious fact was that the woman had barricaded herself from the inside in a desperate attempt to stop someone or something from getting in. Yesterday, while doing some cleaning in the basement, I came across a cell phone that had fallen down a gap behind the washing machine in the wall. There's a voice recording on it. Recorded the same night as the murders by the female victim. It's pretty terrifying. I've already handed it to the police, but I made a transcript of the recording. What you are about to read is the unedited transcript of the cell phone recording I found in the basement. I have to admit, it's pretty disturbing. The desperation in her voice will haunt me forever. Here goes. If you're hearing this, please, please, please give it to the police. My husband's dead. It killed him. I'm so sorry, Scott. I can hear it upstairs now, looking for a way in, and it's only a matter of time before it finds one. I've barricaded myself in the basement, and I've got my eye on the door, the one way in and the one way out. You see, it can't move if you're looking at it. It began 12 weeks ago, the night Scott, my childhood sweetheart and husband of 5 years, confessed that he'd had a drunken one-night stand at his bachelor party in Europe. The apparent guilt had consumed him for the past 5 years, and his sudden urge to be truthful was due to the fact that we were due to get married this same year. His words hit me like a freight train, and the urge to vomit washed over me like a tsunami. I stormed out of the house, our house, that we'd bought together 12 years prior. I felt like the world had swallowed me whole, and in a way it had. I was struck with a throbbing chest pain that rapidly spread down my entire right side. The pain intensified, taking my breath away as I stumbled into a tree to steady myself and felt my body about to faint. Then, darkness. The next thing I remember was waking up in a dark and dismal forest, devoid of color. The air was dry and had a distinct, melodious smell, like rotten meat or a decaying carcass. Worst of all was the terrifying feeling that I'd never experienced before, and one that I pray I never feel again. The feeling of absolute hopelessness. The sky was dull and cloudless, and was ripped apart by soundless, furious lightning that illuminated the bleak landscape I found myself in. I felt like I'd been wandering for hours, maybe even days, when I came across a decaying cave. Animal bones brushed beneath my feet as I made my way towards it. As I approached the cave, the putrid smell grew with intensity, which caused me to retch, and I was violently sick, bringing up my stomach bile. The entrance was made of crumbling stone and was completely opaque. I threw a small stone into it and heard it ricochet down the stone steps and off the walls. The silent lightning strobed the area, and I was able to glimpse into the cave and saw a few descending steps. Then 2 reptilian eyes flashed in the darkness. I stumbled backwards, and just as the lightning struck, I was forcefully thrown by something unseen. The lightning flashed continuously, accompanied by a gale-force wind tossing me like a rag doll. My eyes were fixed on the cave, and I was crippled with terror as a pale, gangly hand reached around the crumbling stone. Another flash hurled me hard against a tree, and suddenly I woke up in the back of an ambulance with paramedics hovering over me with a defibrillator, and 2 words that sent a cold, grotesque shiver through my spine. Welcome back. Welcome back? Back from where? What was that place? That thing in the cave? How long was I gone? Hundreds of questions raced through my mind, but none of them was something I had an answer for. Not yet, anyway. You died in the back of that ambulance, the doctor said, as I lay in a bed in the ICU. The room tilted as I tried to digest what the doctor was telling me. I felt like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I'm 30 years old. I eat healthy. I run 4 times a week. How could this be happening to me? My scans revealed I'd inherited a faulty gene and developed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and suffered a cardiac arrest. I spent the next 7 weeks in the ICU and told nobody of the dark forest or the creature with the yellow eyes. Just the thought of that place was enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. My mother practically moved into the hospital, fussing over me like mothers often do. She blamed herself for my condition, even though her scans were clear, meaning I'd inherited it from my absent father. My husband Scott came on the first day, but I asked him for space. I needed some time to heal and process everything that had happened about both my condition and his infidelity. Although he kept that promise, he would call my mom every day to check on me, to make sure I was okay. I wasn't. Not because of my condition, but from something else. I'd started to see something. I wasn't sure what it was at first. It started out as a tiny dot in my peripheral, nothing more than a speck on my retina. Of course, I had my eyes checked, but all results came back clear, as did the result of my visual cortex. Days later, what started as a dot had began to grow. The first time I saw it, I was at the doctor's office. He left me alone for a moment while he consulted with his surgeon. It was dark outside. The sound of heavy rain pitter-pattering against the glass was hypnotic. I stared at the window, watching as a small handful of people came in and out of the hospital. Then, my eyes were drawn to an ominous silhouette at the far end of the parking lot. I couldn't make out any distinguishing features due to the minimal light, but there was something there, standing deadly still in the shadows. A car horn broke my concentration. A man getting into his truck in the lot and must have pressed the horn by accident. I turned back to the silhouette and was in a completely different position. It had moved. It was standing eerily still again, but like it had frozen mid-walk. I could just make out its elongated limbs, like its arms and its legs had been stretched out. The doctor returned momentarily, startling me. He'd gotten my scans, and everything was how it should be. Good news, you should be okay to be discharged in a few days. That was great news. I was ready to get out of the hospital. I turned back to the window in curiosity, but whatever it was gone. I didn't think about it again until the night before I was going home. It was late, and most of the patients were sleeping. My room is situated at the end of the hall, so I have a clear view of it through my observation window. I wasn't quite ready to go to sleep and was watching something on my iPad. Suddenly, there was a putrid odor wafting in through my open window. The same unmistakable smell that I'd experienced in that other place. 2 nurses walked past my room, neither showing any sign that they could smell it. I covered my nose and mouth and tried to stop myself from heaving. Then my eyes drifted to the observation window and to the corridor. It was here again, the silhouette. At the far end of the hall, completely still with its back pressed up against the wall. But I could see it. It was tall and skinny and had either feelers or tentacles stretched up against the wall like ink spills. Its daunting yellow eyes stared straight at me. I saw another nurse walk up the hall and straight past it, like it wasn't there. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe visual hallucinations were a symptom of what I'd been through. Maybe it was a side effect of the meds I was taking. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. It isn't real, I whispered to myself. I opened my eyes and it hadn't gone. It had moved closer. Halfway down the hall, it had dropped onto all fours like a large dog, staring straight at me. Its long tentacles spread out across the floor and up the wall. I was absolutely petrified. I moved over to the window tentatively. The smell that resonated from this creature was overpowering. I watched it for a few moments until a nurse walked past the window and stared at me. Like before, when I looked back, it wasn't there. It was as though I'd imagined it. I climbed back into bed, but I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, my mom came to pick me up. I left with a suitcase of medication and instructions on how and when to take them. I didn't tell my mom or anyone at the hospital about my hallucinations. I was worried if I did, the doctor wouldn't let me leave. I had decided to stay with Mom until I was ready to talk to Scott. He brought a box over with some essentials, some comfy clothes and pajamas, and my own toothbrush, since I'd been using a cheap dollar store one that I had brought up until now. He was sorry, and it was clear that he hadn't been sleeping. He said he'd wait for me until I was ready to talk. I missed both him and our house, but I wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. My mom suggested that I go into town, see the locals, get some fresh air in my lungs. She offered to drive me, and then we could meet back up in an hour for lunch. While in town, I noticed a poster for the yearly traveling fairground in a store window. I was fond of it. I had good memories growing up of the fair. It's where Scott and I had shared our first kiss. We were halfway around the Ferris wheel when it started to rain. He covered us with his jacket, and then he kissed me. That was the moment I knew I'd fallen for him. I was flooded with happy emotions, and it felt right that I should text Scott. I'm ready to talk. I'll be at the place where we shared our first kiss at 8 o'clock tonight. Chloe. He replied almost instantly. I'll be there. Thank you. After a quick smile to myself, I went to walk to the local market. It was bustling with energy, vendors selling fruits and produce, handmade furniture, bakeries, and plenty of other things. After browsing the stalls, I was hit with that smell again, that horrific, nauseating smell. I felt the hair on my arms prickle up. I knew it was here, somewhere, observing me. My eyes narrowed as I scanned the area. I weaved in and out of the locals, looking for it. Paranoia struck me like lightning. I was bumping into people as I went. All eyes had now turned to me. I burst into tears, sprinting back to the lot and leaping into Mom's car. I was sitting in the passenger seat, crying my eyes out. I looked out the window and saw my mother rushing back to the car, shouting my name. Someone must have told her I'd been freaking out. I looked out the opposite window and it was there, standing on top of a vehicle several cars away. Get away from me, I screamed. My mother whipped open the door. What is it? What happened? She replied. She couldn't see it. Nobody could see it. I told her that I'd just had a panic attack. I hadn't been around people outside the hospital in a few months, and I felt overwhelmed. She knew I wasn't being truthful, but it's the only answer I could give. That night, I decided to go ahead and meet Scott at the fair. When I saw him waiting for me by the Ferris wheel, my heart felt whole again, if only for a moment. We took our tokens and went to the wheel. He talked as we went around about how sorry he was and how much of an idiot he'd been, which I agreed with. Everything was going well until I saw that creature again, standing on top of the ghost house attraction, watching me. I kept my eyes on the figure while grabbing Scott's arm. Do you see it? I asked him in a shaky voice. See what? He replied. It's standing right there on top of the ghost house. I could see him squinting, trying to look, but I knew deep down that he wouldn't be able to see it, because only I could. Sweetie, there's nobody there. "Look at me," he replied calmly. "I can't. If I look away, it'll move." "Chloe, look at me. There's nothing there." He grabbed my chin and turned my face towards his. "No, it'll move. It wants me to look away," I screamed. I quickly spun around, my eyes darting back to the ghost house. But it wasn't there. I looked around, anxious, Scott looking on with worry. "Where is it?" My anxiety was palpable. I looked down, and it was at the bottom of the Ferris wheel. It had moved inhumanly fast. I screamed and almost fell out of the carriage. But Scott held on to me. Hey, I got you. What is it?" he said, desperately trying to keep hold of me. I stood up in a panic, rocking the carriage. Scott tried to hang on to me, but it was too late, and I plummeted 20 feet to the ground. The last thing I remember was Scott screaming for an ambulance. I was fortunate enough to have only suffered a sprained wrist and a slight concussion. My doctor wanted to keep me in overnight, which I reluctantly agreed to. I decided to confide in Scott. I told him everything, that the cave in the forest, the creature, that thing stalking me, this monstrous entity that must have crawled out of the pits of hell. Worst of all, about it getting closer to me. He could see that I was terrified, and instead of trying to explain away what I was experiencing, he just held me. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. He spent hours just holding me. He offered to stay the night, to stay awake in the chair while I was asleep, but I couldn't have him do that. After Scott left, I managed to get a few hours of rest. I woke up at 2 in the morning and grabbed my bottle of water from the nightstand. That's when I noticed the door was closed, even though I specifically requested that it stay open. And then there was the horrendous smell. I knew it had to be close. It was in the room. It was crouched down in the corner on all fours, blending into the darkness, watching me. I desperately tried to scream, but no sound came out. Keeping my eyes on it, I slowly climbed out of bed, with my back pressed firmly against the wall. I knew it couldn't move if I didn't look away. I sidestepped along the wall towards the door. I started to maneuver around a set of drawers, knocking something off that caught my eye for a millisecond. But that's all it took. It was now standing on its 2 legs again. It must have been 8 feet tall, with outstretched limbs. A streak of moonlight illuminated part of its pale blue face. Its yellow eyes glistened in the light. Its slimy tentacles spread up the wall and onto the roof. I kept my back to the door and kept moving. I made it to the door, grabbing the door handle, but it was locked. I kicked the door, but no one could hear me. I could see the key for the door on the table in my peripheral. I fumbled around on the table without looking. I grabbed everything but the key. I knew I had to find it. I quickly glanced to my left and saw the key. Looking back, the creature was point blank in front of me, reaching for my throat. Its black curved talons had pierced my neck, and blood was trickling down. Somehow I managed to scream, and within seconds 2 orderlies had barged through the door. All they found was me, alone, with blood trickling down my neck. I barged straight past them and ran as fast as I could out of the hospital. I ended up running all the way home. I banged as loud as I could on the door, forgetting that it was almost 3:30 in the morning. Scott answered the door in his pajamas. A worried look stretched across his face. I told him what was happening at the hospital while he bandaged my neck. "See, this is proof that it's something real. This is physical proof. You believe me, right? You have to," I barked. After a pause, he replied, "I believe you. I believe you're seeing something." I registered the pause and the hesitation in his voice. He didn't believe me, but I didn't blame him. After talking for a few hours, I had calmed down enough that I told Scott to get some sleep. He was reluctant to leave me, so he took a nap in the chair. I grabbed my laptop and searched the web for anything related to what was happening. There's thousands of incidents across the world related to haunted houses, demons, cults, possessions, but none that was specific to the entity that was stalking me. Every time I heard a sound, a car outside or a floorboard creak, I jumped. I was a nervous wreck. I went into the kitchen and got a glass of water. I looked out the window into the darkness, expecting to see something, but there was nothing. I went back into the room, and it was there. I dropped my glass, and it shattered on the floor. Scott leapt from the chair. What is it? I couldn't speak. My lips were glued shut. I slowly raised my hand and pointed at it. It was standing at the far end of the room. I kept my eyes on it the entire time. Scott rushed over to me. "Chloe, there's nothing there, sweetheart. Whatever you're seeing, it isn't real." He headed towards it. "No, Scott, don't!" I pleaded as I grabbed his arm. He shrugged it off and marched over to it. "There's nothing here. I'm going to prove it to you." He cocked his arm back and swung his fist. Only his arm stopped mid-swing. He hit the creature. I moved to grab Scott and stood barefoot on the broken shards of glass, cutting my feet. I screamed out, and for a split second, I looked down. That was all it took. When I looked up, the creature had already grabbed Scott and folded him in half like a piece of paper. The sound of his spine breaking echoed through the house. Scott lay dead on the floor, his eyes wide open and looking at me. I screamed and backed away into the kitchen. I slammed the door shut and ran to the rear door. It was locked, and I'd left the key in my bag in the front room. I noticed Scott's cell phone on the countertop, so I grabbed it and ran down into the basement. I shut the door and pushed the spare fridge in front of it. Then I hid in the corner, crouched down beside the washing machine. That's where I am now, hiding and crying. I can't tell anyone because Scott's cell doesn't have signal down here, which is why I'm recording this message on his cell in the hopes that someone will hear the story. I can hear it now, moving around upstairs, and it knows my eyes will be watching the door, so it's looking for another way in. I'm so scared. I'm the reason Scott's dead. My true love. I'll never forgive myself for that. The thought of that is far worse than anything the monster can do to me. Oh God, it's here. The old laundry chute. How did I forget? What am I going to do? It's watching me with those horrifying yellow eyes. I can't keep running because it'll find me. And I won't put anyone else in danger. It's me that it wants. I'm so sorry, Scott. I love you so much. Mom, I love you too. I'm gonna close my eyes now. 3, 2, 1. That's it. That's the recording. It's very disturbing to me. If only you could hear her voice. She was terrified. The police haven't been in contact as I write this. I'm not expecting them to either. The woman mentioned her mother in the recording. I might try to find her, tell her what I found, just in case the police don't believe me. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.